want to say two things as disclaimers. First of all, both talismans and Eucharist are used in, as far as I know, pretty much every culture. Talismans for sure are definitely used in all cultures. Eucharists are also used very widespread. So this is not just a British Victorian kind of practice that went on in 1850 and we pretend like it's ancient. This really is something that everyone does, okay? To differentiate from the rest of the stuff. The second disclaimer is that I'm not teaching a Golden Dawn method tonight. Okay? I am teaching a method based entirely in Crowley's writings, who was a very accomplished Golden Dawn magician, but I by no means mean to teach this Golden Dawn tradition. I teach what I know. I happen to be a Thelemite, and I draw from the Thelemic tradition. So just to get those things out there. So what's going to happen is I'm going to talk at you for a while. Hopefully you guys will talk back at points in a respectful way. But discussion is encouraged, that kind of thing. But as we go through this, I will get to a point where after talking about the theory of talismans and Eucharist for just a little bit, I will talk about how to create a ritual to create a talisman using the book 777. Does anyone here have no idea what 777 is when I say that? You have no idea what that is. Never heard of 777. This is going to be so fun for you then.
An alternate version of Kabbalion or
He's
anything.
dual wielding some 777s back there. So that's pretty cool.
And we have some more.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use 777 to devise a ceremony to create a talisman. This is actually partially just to teach people how to use 777 to create magical ceremonies in general. Talismans are very general kinds of ideas, as we will see. It can be utilized in many different ways, and I hope to kind of make people more familiar with 777 in a way that does not seem totally overwhelming, just mostly overwhelming. So we'll shoot for mostly overwhelming. At the end, if we have time, we'll see. We could even perform a little ceremony ourselves. So here we go. So let me get the first page of my notes in front. That would be helpful. So what is a talisman? So for the purposes of this class, I'm going to define things in certain ways. Both other occultists as well as scholars would undoubtedly disagree and be able to write entire essays as to how I am wrong. But for the practical purposes of these classes, I'm going to define these in a specific way so that we can continue on without getting bogged down in too much pedantry. So for the purposes of this class, a talisman is a physical object, specifically one that stores a particular energy. This energy can be thought of in a lot of ways. Energy is just one of those ways of thinking about that thing we're talking about. So a talisman is a physical object that stores a particular energy. That energy can be thought of as energy itself, such as, electricity, other forms of forces and powers, gravity, whatever. Or it could be thought of as a certain thought, a certain intention. So a talisman can be thought of as a physical object that is a storehouse of a particular intention or a particular thought. Or, if you're old school, a particular god that inhabits this object. Okay. There is a book by Crowley called Magic Without Tears. In chapter 20 of this, he has some interesting remarks about talismans and Eucharists, or just talismans. Sorry to get you excited there. So in Magic Without Tears, chapter 20, he says a talisman is a storehouse of some particular kind of energy, the kind that is needed to accomplish the task for which you have constructed it. Crowley, in my opinion, is one of the best occultists who takes magical ideas and magical terminology and brings them from the particular into the general, makes them abstract. So these kind of very concrete, esoteric, magical ideas to Crowley refer to everything. So famously, he says magic is causing change in conformity with will. So he takes this kind of idea of Victorian ceremonial magic and says, actually, it's just a particular case of this more general idea, pretty much life itself, or to be specific, all intentional acts. In this case, he's saying a talisman. We often associate talismans in magic with these things that have a bunch of sigils on them, probably in languages that we can't pronounce very well, and so on and so forth. But he's saying a talisman, again, a talisman is a storehouse of some particular kind of energy, the kind that's needed to accomplish the task for which you have constructed it. So this handout is a talisman of the knowledge that I hope to impart to you tonight. It is a storehouse of a particular kind of energy, in this case, tables of information, that's needed to accomplish the task for which it is constructed, which is to make you moderately confused. I forget what I said exactly. But it is to convey the knowledge of how to construct ceremonies in accordance with this magical philosophy. So just to show you that anything really can be a talisman by this definition, a storehouse of a particular kind of energy. Okay, so assuming that the talisman is a kind of physical object, a kind of magical object, part of that definition is that it is some particular kind of energy, with emphasis on particular. Okay, so compare a talisman as a symbol or as a storehouse of a particular kind of energy with the pentacle, which is a different magical weapon. Does anyone know what element a pentacle is attributed to?
Earth.
Earth. So from over on this side. 1,
Second
0.
Earth.
Yeah. What did you say?
Second Earth.
Second Earth. Is there a first Earth?
No, seconding Earth. He said Earth. I'm seconding Earth.
Oh, okay. Yes,
Seconding
the motion has passed. Yes. So a pentacle, a very classic pentacle, looks like this, basically. It's just some kind of image. It's usually some kind of, in the Western magical tradition, some kind of hexagram, because the hexagram represents the universe or the macrocosm. And the term is sometimes a pentacle, but Crowley in particular writes a pentacle. So what does the Pam part of pentacle mean literally?
All.
You guys already know all this information. So it's basically an alticle. What does that mean? It's meant to represent everything. Or in other words, not anything particular. It's meant to be general, everything. So if this is the universe, let's be fancy and put these little sigils in. This is kind of a typical magical pentacle. It has the 7 planets. Everything in the universe is here, symbolically, okay? So Crowley, in the same chapter of Magic Without Tears, chapter 20, he says that, quote, a talisman is a much more restricted idea. It is no more than one of the objects in the magician's pentacle. So basically, we can imagine the pentacle as representing the entire pie of the universe. The talisman is what slice you want of that pie. Okay? So if we want a Mars talisman, we would want this particular slice of the pie, and our talisman would be constructed around this particular aspect of this more general symbol. So Crowley goes on with his typical kind of Crowleyan overestimation of his reader's ability, and he says, as you would expect, it's very little trouble to design. All you need is to make considerations about your proposed operation, decide which planet, which sign, element, or sub-element you need, and then to accomplish your miracle. Okay, so for most people who have not studied this, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds like I have no fucking clue. Like, what? For those who are familiar, it really is not that much trouble once you learn how to figure out these tables and the general kind of sense or logic that goes into these ceremonies. Crowley is fond of saying, like, nothing further needs to be said, when it's like, what? Of course it does. Like, and then his commentary on things is like, wait, we need commentaries for the commentaries. But we'll try to do our best. So I was saying that Crowley is one of my favorite people, favorite occultists, who takes magical ideas in the sense of the Western mystery tradition and makes you realize that they are just symbols of life itself. Right? So Crowley in Magic in Theory and Practice, this is a different book. It's bigger and just as obscure. He writes, quote, "A talisman is something upon which an act of will, that is, of magic, has been performed in order to fit it for us for a purpose. Repeated acts of will in respect of any object consecrate it without further ado." Okay, so a talisman is anything where you have performed an act of will on it in order to fit it for a purpose. So earlier I took scissors and I cut these things into circles for a purpose, which you'll get to do your fun arts and crafts later. It is therefore a talisman. This cup was shaped in a factory for the explicit purpose, I believe, to hold liquid and other objects. It is therefore a talisman of sorts. Extend this to your clothes, the rugs, the walls. All these things are basically magical objects insofar as someone took their will and shaped it to perform a certain purpose. He says repeated acts of will consecrate it without further ado. So the more, suppose this was the first cup ever made, right? It's a little vague and it's like, oh wait, what is this for? It's weird. And someone puts some water in it and it's like, yes, that's what it was for. It's been consecrated. But it's still kind of ambiguous. You could use it for other things. Over the course of 5,000 years of people using cups, it's pretty unambiguous that this object is consecrated to hold things, specifically liquid. This is a very general abstract idea of this. But basically, the more times you use something, the more connected that object is with its purpose that it was molded for. It becomes consecrated for that purpose. So to give you an example, Crowley writes in Magic Without Tears, that same chapter, number 20, he says, "Most of my talismans, like my invocations, have been poems." What? How is that possible? Talismans have to be objects made out of arcane metals carved with languages we don't actually speak, right? No. Talismans are any object that were intentionally formed for a purpose. And in this case, Crowley even had these like wacky Western magical purposes for them, but they were poems. They weren't literally, they were physical objects, but they weren't objects in the same sense. They were words formed in a certain way. Crowley was also very fond of designing the books themselves to be talismans. I think he was actually one of the first people to really explore this as kind of like a form of art or as a form of artistic representation to reinforce the content of what he was publishing. So for example, there are several versions of Book 4, Liber ABA, which adds up to 4. Book 4, ABA is 4, and it's printed in a square. So just to give you like a really simplistic example, he had kind of a talismanic form of the book to consecrate that material on yet another level, the words in it and the shape itself. There are many of his books. There's even a book on his books called The Wickedest Books of the World that was contributed to by Tool's drummer, Danny Carey, who is a collector of Alistair Crowley first editions. But there's a lot of really beautiful images of Crowley's books that he created as talismans deliberately. And he spent a lot of his own money bankrupting himself, basically, to make these things really pretty. To give you yet another example, this is the longest quote of the night, so gird your loins. Here we go. So this is from Magic in Theory and Practice. Crowley writes, "There are a great many talismans in this world which are left lying about in the most reprehensibly careless manner. Such are the objects of popular adoration, as icons and idols. But it is actually true that a great deal of real magical force is locked up in these things. Consequently, by destroying these sacred symbols, you can overcome magically the people who adore them. So it's not at all irrational to fight for one's flag, provided that the flag is an object which really means something to somebody. Similarly, with the most widely spread and most devotedly worshipped talisman of all, any guesses?
Cross.
Nope.
Money.
Money. So the most widely spread and most devotedly worshipped talisman of all, money, you can break the magical will of a worshipper of money by taking his money away from him, or destroying its value in some way or another. But in the case of money, general experience tells us that there's very little of it lying about loose." This is him joking in his very Victorian way. In this case, above all, people have recognized its talismanic virtue, which is to say, its power as an instrument of will. So this quotation is particularly interesting to me for two reasons, as the two examples he gives. The first is a flag. If you want one of the most powerful talismans, at least in the last, say, 150 years, and probably way back before that, it would be a nation's flag. If you take the American flag, that immediately conjures up images of, like guns and Jesus and patriotism, or like horrible imperialism and interventionist policies that's creating chaos around the world, or whatever. Whatever that talisman means, it has a lot of power. These flags are really powerful magical symbols. It's a very good example of a magical talisman, especially one that is consecrated repeatedly at every major sporting event, right? We even sing a ritual invocation or hymn to it as we put our hands on our hearts and unite ourselves in our solar centers around this symbol that we all agree is the one of freedom, right? It's a really incredible ritual that goes on all the time. Strangely enough, I at one point tried to find a video of some kind of like Star Spangled Banner, like an American ritual, basically. And I could not find it until I remembered that all of our rituals happen at sporting events. And then I could find a ton of them. So it's not so much kind of state-sponsored propaganda anymore. It's usually outsourced to the corporations that make a good deal of money on that kind of thing. Wait, I'm preaching. So, back to the class. So there's a flag and there's also money. Money is the most powerful talisman on Earth right now, I believe. Most people believe it is the highest goal of life, even if they... What?
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. Thanks, Obama. It's the most powerful talisman in the world. People strive toward it as the highest goal in life, even if they kind of proclaim a philosophy that they don't. And like he said, you can break the will of someone by taking away this talisman. As most people know, money is basically an agreed upon magical object. Like, our money is not based in any real kind of currency, at least anymore. So it's really basically we're all playing this magical game with each other, agreeing that this thing has power, which is fine. I mean, I have nothing against agreeing upon some kind of currency. But the very fact that this equals power in our world is the most clear symbol of a talisman, and how this is not just, again, and not just a British Victorian idea. This is real. Like, this affects all of us. We all have to spend a great deal of our lives working for this talisman, and so on and so forth. So the talismans that you can create, obviously you can take existing talismans such as money or flags or other symbols or objects, but more traditionally in the kind of Western ceremonial tradition, there is some kind of tangible physical object, a single object, that is used as a storehouse of your intention. Okay? So basically, a talisman, what you need is an object and an intention. And that object should ideally be a symbolic reflection of that intention. The way we symbolically reflect that in our system is to use symbolic correspondences. Okay. Another way would be, like, you can even imagine, like, what would you put on a flag to symbolize your intention? If you wanted to create war, you probably would not put a teddy bear and flowers on your flag, right? You would put a sword, some skulls, some badass lines from your holy book that tell you to kill people, things like that, you know, the ones that people actually do. So likewise, you want that thing to represent the energy you're creating. It can easily be a physical sword. It can easily be a physical teddy bear, anything like that. In this case, we're going to be using symbols. So this could be a stone. It could be a piece of wax. It could be a piece of paper. Any object. You can get kind of crazy and be like, oh, well, I want the object itself to be, you know, made of these particular things that are related to the thing I'm doing, and then everything that goes on it will also, if you can do that, more power to you, right? But it's sometimes a little impossible to do that for various reasons, such as if you need these metals that don't exist on the physical plane, or you know, you don't have all the money in the world to buy these kinds of things. It becomes very difficult. So my advice would be to do your best, and remember that ritual is essentially will. There are words and there are actions, but these all come back to will in the sense of intention and focus. So what is really crucial is that your intention is behind it. Your will is behind it. All the rest of the stuff, the colors, the shapes, the names, the materials, all that is really just a reflection of that will in the first place anyway, or to reinforce that will or intention. So I'm missing a page here about the Eucharist, so I will improv on it. The really short version of this is that a Eucharist is a talisman that you can consume. That's pretty much it. So the most famous Eucharist that we know of right now is probably the Roman Catholic Mass, where they eat the body and blood of Jesus Christ in kind of a commemoration of this kind of Last Supper. And lots of people eat his body all the time and his blood all the time, and people don't find this strange in the slightest. This practice is incredibly widespread. They stole this from other cults. Those cults stole that from the cults before them. It's very widespread, especially the consumption of a god. The magical idea here is that which you consume, you become. You are what you eat. Okay? What happens in a Eucharistic ritual is that something is consecrated as a talisman of something, a storehouse of an energy, or like I said, a god. And that basically is it if you want a talisman. Okay? You've consecrated it, and it's this kind of storehouse that you have to kind of draw that energy toward you or make you identify with that energy. The only further step in a Eucharist is that all the energy expended into this talisman is then reabsorbed into yourself. This is kind of a classic magical theory.
But as somebody who makes them, I can say that my intention is to further everybody further their own wills. I mean, I'm definitely putting shit into them when I'm making them.
Not literal shit, I hope.
Stuff. Will.
Guys.
Will into my pick-a-lack.
I would say in that case, in my personal opinion, this is my very personal opinion, is that the Gnostic Mass has a generic, intent, which is health, wealth, strength, joy, and peace, and the fulfillment of will and of love under will, that is perpetual happiness. So in magical ceremonies, when in doubt, just put down, this is to do my true will. That'll get you out of it.
Accomplished, you can wait for it.
Yeah.
To it.
Where
But beware what you wish for. Kind of to put somewhat of a finer point, Crowley often speaks of Eucharist as if they have a single purpose, which is to attain knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, or to attain union with God. He often frames it in this way, where the Eucharist itself is made to be God, then you feed upon God so that you become God. And it's just this very mystical kind of idea. That is because I think Crowley, very rightly so, thought that all magic should be toward this end of what he called knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, or union with God, at least at first, to kind of get your grounding. If you think about it, talismans are basically storehouses of your intention or your will. The question then becomes, what would you intend or what would you will? In attaining knowledge and conversation, theoretically, you learn what it is that you really will, or learn what it is that you intend, and you don't waste time on all these different kind of non-subservient goals to your true will. So you could spend a lifetime making talismans to get more chocolate, for example. But it will not, basically, in the long... You could. Might work. But the thing in the background of Crowley's mind is that it should always be toward the accomplishment of your true will. And chocolate may very well be the accomplishment of your true will in particular moments. But overall, you should basically unite with the God within and let it tell you what to do, to be really oversimplistic about that. By the way, we're going to be using these paper things as examples. You can eat it. It's high in fiber, but I don't recommend it. Okay? That's my disclaimer. Before I go into how to use 777 to devise a ceremony, I want to read one more quote from Crowley. He says that I often use, he's talking about making talismans in kind of this classic way we're about to do, of using corresponding symbols to achieve a pre-desired intention, or pre-stated intention. He says, in Magic Without Tears, I used to often make the background of my talismans 4 concentric circles painting then the first inmost, so this one, I'm sure there's probably some kind of sigil in here. Okay, so he painted the first, the inmost in the king scale, the second in the queen, third in the prince, outermost in the princess scale. What does that mean? These are all things that are in this that I'm about to give you. They are specific colors that are attributed to all these different things, the planets, the zodiac, whatever. So he basically took the different levels and colored in this crazy circle thing. All 4 colors. He's taking all the color attributions and putting them on here. Okay? So then he would put the sign, planet, or element to which he was devoting it. In this case, the smiley face element. And then on this, preferably in flashing colors, which is flashing colors basically just means inverted colors, to be simplistic about it. He would paint the appropriate names and figures. And then the talisman would be surrounded with a suitable versicle from a holy book as devised by the magician. So basically, there would be all these kind of god names, angelic names that all correspond, and then he would write something from a holy book, which in traditional, rich white people magic would be probably from the Bible. If you're a Thelemite, it probably is going to be from the Book of the Law or the Holy Books of Thelema. What this gives kind of a very simplistic example of how you might construct something. You take colors that are resonant with the intended end, and you paint them on. You take names that are resonant in some system, and you draw them on. Then you take words from a holy book or a sacred text. Could be anything, really. You could take from the Tao Te Ching. I don't think there's any universal law that will explode your talisman if you write something from the Bhagavad Gita instead of the Book of the Law. No promises, though. And you basically put all the stuff that's relevant to your intention on this object. So what do you do with before we get into actually making this thing, what would you do with a talisman? Any ideas?
Frisbee.
You could throw it, yeah.
Meditate on it.
You could meditate on it, that's an excellent idea.
Focus.
You could focus.
Mind.
Use it as a focus. A frisbee might very well work with, say, if you're invoking air. And like, this is how I cast it out into the world on the medium of air. Okay, so this is a bunch of tables here, and we're going to go through these somewhat slowly, but I will try to be your intrepid psychopomp on this journey into the underworld of the Kabbalah.
What was the rule of advertising you were going to say?
Oh, I forgot. The rule is you have to see something about 7 times before you go and buy it or you recognize the brand. I think the same would apply of reconsecrating the symbol. The more you do that, the more your subconscious is advertised to gets the you get it. Everything in 777 is arranged according to something called the key scale. Now I'm going to say something kind of controversial insofar as it is against what a lot of people do, but I have the very nice authority of Crowley on my side who created this key scale. 0 through 10 refers to this, the tree of life, the Sephiroth specifically on the tree of life. 0 refers to kind of the negative veils as 1. They're all kind of squished together in that 0. 11 through 32 bis, those numbers are not significant. They are simply a key scale. They are meant to be a way for you to kind of look across and figure out what's going on. Okay? For the sake of convenience, we're going to just be dealing with the Sephiroth. The rest of the key scale deals with all these little characters, all these paths in between. And when I say there's no relation, I mean that the number 11 has no necessary Kabbalistic relation with the Fool card. I'm sorry to tell you this. It probably says it is a convention used to create a key scale. So all you people that said when 23 comes up in your shrines or whatever, it really has nothing to do with the hangman. That's just a key scale for convenience, because it's a bunch of tables. You need some kind of way of discerning.
Well, it's a modern analog. It's your unique index and your sequel table.
There you go. That sounds like a programming thing that I have no idea what you're talking about, but I agree. Okay, so we're going to be using the key scale, and we really are only going to be using 3 through 10, except for very specialized purposes. This 3 through 10 is 3 right here, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So from here down, which means that these two are going to have to kind of just hang out, be themselves. Why is this? It's because this is 1, which is Keter, the ultimate unity. This is basically, in a sense, weird backward sense, the pentacle. It contains all. So there's nothing particular about it. You could create a Keter talisman easily. but it would not really be for a specific purpose. It would be for the highest attainment. It's the goal of all mysticism, mystic acts of devotion, prayer, meditation, etc. And also, 2 is essentially kind of like the active aspect of the one. It's the will of the universe. The real answer why it's 3 and down is because the 7 planets are started to be attributed from here down. Whereas this is the zodiac, and this is the primum mobile, kind of the Kabbalistic Big Bang. Okay? So if you imagine the Western Hermetic worldview, there's Earth, and then there's the Moon, and then there's Mercury, and then there's Venus, and then there's the Sun, and then there's Mars, and then there's Jupiter, and then there's Saturn, and then there's the fixed stars outside of that. Yep, just like this. And then outside of that is the primum mobile. Okay? For our purposes, we're going to start with the planets and move in. Why is this? It's because, in a sense, the 7 planets all encompass everything anyway. We can attribute everything to them. So, for these ones, we're just not going to deal with them, okay? And we're going to go through these, and I'm going to tell you what these are and why you would focus on them, okay? So, this is the part that's kind of left unsaid in a lot of classes, in my opinion. Not this part, but we'll get to it. So 3 is this. Does anyone know what planet the 3rd Sephira is attributed to?
Saturn.
So we have Saturn. Okay. 4 is Jupiter. Okay, so Saturn, Jupiter. Number 5, the red one, Mars. Number 6, the yellow one,
Sun.
You guys are so excited about Mars. I thought you were going to keep going. Okay, so Sun, sometimes called Sol in the Latin. Where are we? 7, the green one.
Venus.
So we have Venus. 8, the orange one.
Mercury.
I'm really not good at writing on vertical surfaces, I'm sorry. 9, the purple one.
Luna.
La Luna, the moon. And 10 is Earth. Good old Earth. Usually Earth is kind of left out of this. It's usually just the 7 planets here. So we're going to put a sad face by this one too for now. All right, so suppose you wanted to do a ritual and you had kind of an idea what you wanted in your life, but you weren't really sure how to manifest that symbolically. This is the part that I think is left out of a lot of classes. They just kind of assume that you know these things. Back in the day, I'm sure everyone had a total education in the Roman and Greek mythologies and knew all these things kind of off the top of their head. And by everyone, I mean the privileged class of aristocrats. But nowadays, people really are not connected to these kinds of things, and that's why I'm going to tell you. So, for Saturn, there's a lot of ideas that are resonant with each of these. I'm going to list some, and I'm going to ask you guys to shout out some if you think of them. So, Saturn has to do with death. It has to do with the idea of peace, as opposed to, say, war. It has to do with time. It has to do with discipline. Any other general ideas that people can think of? Old age.
Restrictions.
Restrictions. So discipline is a form of restriction, but restrictions in general, it's often attributed to the skeleton, for example. It's the kind of physical restriction. So you might be like, wow, all these things seem really lame. I would never do a ritual to do any of these, other than peace, of course.
What about discipline?
I was just going to say, discipline, if you were having trouble maintaining a regular practice or something like that, you might create a Saturn talisman to help you with that kind of discipline. Or suppose you had some kind of practice for whatever reason, there's a million reasons for it, to contemplate death or mortality. Death, time, that is a Saturn thing, okay?
Duration,
Yep, okay? So,
duration.
whatever. Good enough. So all these things and more, we'll learn more as we go into it, are Saturn. So for Jupiter, there's wealth. Well, I mean, everyone wants that, right? Because that's the ultimate talisman. So benevolence, kind of goodwill, that kind of thing. Tolerance. Specifically, kind of rules in order, but like a benevolent rule in order. Anyone else have Jupiterian?
Expansiveness.
Expansiveness, yeah. So your life feels really constricted. You might do a Jupiter ritual. Expansiveness. Anyone else?
King?
King, yeah. Royalty is very much Jupiterian. Fortunes and queens. Fortune, indeed. Specifically good fortune in this case, although Crowley has some nuance added to that in his tarot card, but Jupiter is classically associated as kind of like the greater beneficent, as opposed to Saturn, which is generally seen as the greater malefic. So Mars, strength, right? Power. What else? War.
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 Work.
Vigor, violence.
I heard violence.
Vigor.
Vigor, so energy is very much Mars. Even muscular energy is very attributed to Mars. And violence.
Masculine.
It can be masculine. That's a kind of a cultural association, but yes, all these are cultural, really. Conquest, yep. So conquest or victory. You start telling Thelemic women that Mars is masculine, you might find differently. So soul or the sun. So balance, harmony. Tiferet literally means beauty. I would say this is kind of the generic idea of beauty. It's like a pure platonic form of beauty as opposed to specifically like sensuous beauty.
Bright, shiny.
Bright and shiny if things aren't bright and shiny enough in your life. Interestingly, the term deva, which means God, comes from a root that means shining. So etymologically, God and shiny thing are very much connected. Bright, shiny. What else do I have here? I also have true will. That's just because the sun is very much associated with the center. Every man and every woman is a star. It's very much a Thelemic association. So Venus, into the sexy things. So sexy. You also have love and passion. What else?
Lust.
Lust, for sure. Lust. Oh, so coy.
Sensuous.
Sensuous. What was this order?
Success.
Success. Yeah. like Nikkei or victory. That's not literally means victory.
Remember that beauty?
I would say, yeah, beauty in the sensuous sense is very Venusian.
Vanity's implied.
Vanity too, yep. Absolutely. These are just some examples. I would also say just pleasure. Pleasure and joy are very Venusian. In kind of a typical way that you would understand pleasure and joy, not a very abstract way.
Well, they're kind of mixed Venusian and Jody. Like passion.
Which one?
is,
Pleasure and joy, you mean?
Pleasure
Yeah,
and
yeah.
joy are have both natures, as does passion and
Mhm.
lust are connected
Absolutely.
in with Jupiter
Yep,
And Mars.
and Mars.
and Mars, yep.
We need that blood and blood.
As you kind of get acclimated with these things, you start to see like the nuance of like that, the Venusian type of pleasure or the Venusian type of joy as opposed to say the solar type of joy. These things start to kind of work themselves out, especially as you study these tables that that you're potentially looking at. So Mercury, let's just finish this off. We have intelligence,
Magic.
yeah, magic in a sense.
Communication.
Communication, as I write very sloppily.
Medicine.
You need a Vanna White.
I do.
I said medicine.
Medicine is very much associated with him.
Hermetic.
So health, hermetic things, yeah. Anyone else?
Ethereal? Maybe?
Yeah, things that are kind of like quicksilver, moving around very quickly, yeah. So quick moving.
Goes along with the hermetic.
Etheric, yeah. So yeah, if you need to,
Actually, etheric has kind of a special position in this context that doesn't really fit with Mercury. It fits more with Moon.
yeah, ethereal in like the just general adjective sense of
Ethereal,
Yeah.
yes, not etheric.
yes,
That's-
yes. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Okay.
Okay, last one, Luna. What is the moon attributed to?
Childbirth.
Childbirth. Yep. So,
Hidden, the mysteries.
so specifically, kind of infancy, hidden things, hidden things,
Changing.
mysteries. So, so flux, kind of cycles,
Illusion.
illusion,
Deception.
illusion and deception.
Why do you guys hate the moon so much?
Munchausen. Joke.
Okay, so no one can read any of this, but we went through this where, so if you could think of, so suppose you wanted to study for a test and you wanted some kind of magical ability to kind of reinforce this. What planet might you invoke?
Mercury.
Mercury, indeed, because it corresponds with all these things. Suppose you wanted to, you felt really lazy and tired, so you wanted a lot of kind of physical energy and vigor to support you. What might you invoke? Mars. So you guys know this, right? Sort of. I'll take all the credit for you guys knowing this. That works. So basically, these are the general qualities as we go through them that you should start to associate with these basic symbolic ideas. Once you have that idea, so for tonight, I'm going to pick one that we probably all can do with, which is love and Venus. Okay, so Venus, pleasure, love, relationships, passion, that kind of thing. Once you have that intention, it's my intention to create a talisman that serves as a storehouse of the Venusian energy of love. Then basically what you do is you take this, which is the number of the Sephiroth, and the number of the key scale. Then you take your 777 and you just go to 7, just go right across on 7. for each of these little things, and you'll see the things that correspond. Now, you might notice that 777 is this giant book, and I just gave you a single piece of paper, right? So there is, this is a technical term of art, there's a shit ton more in that book, okay? So there's a lot in there. These are ones that I pulled out because I use them the most, and I can totally speak to most of them, why they are the way they are. So let's start on this side where at the top it says sphere of prima mobile, and it has all this Hebrew and stuff on here. You got that, right? Okay. So on the top we have the English of column 6, and I didn't include column 6, so sorry. But basically these are the English of whatever kind of thing is attributed to these. I already talked about this, where you can see 1 is the prima mobile, 2 is the zodiac, and then from 3 to 9 we have those planets, right? So it's a good place to start. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Venus, Mercury, Luna, and the elements. There's a typo on number 7 where they missed a space, but I will let that go. So the next one over is basically the Sephiroth on this diagram right here, with both the Hebrew and their Crowley's English transliteration. Okay, so under 0, which is kind of up here, there's the Ein Sof Or. Then we basically just go down here, and as we go, these are basically things that you might write on your talisman, okay? Or put on your talisman, okay? So I'm going to pass these out at this point as I'm going through 777. Take one pass it around. Okay, so the first thing that we know about what we're trying to do, so tonight's intention is for love and to kind of attract love to ourselves in whatever fashion. The first thing that we know is that this is attributed to what planet?
Venus.
Okay, so something you might put on, for example, say the middle of your thing would be a Venus symbol, right? This is an example. You do not have to do exactly what I'm doing up here. The other thing that we know, what number is this attributed to? 7. So we could, for example, put a number 7 there, or even better, we could that was not good. We could draw a heptagram. These are particularly hard to draw, in my opinion. I'm not just saying that because this one's bad. 7 is kind of wonky. But you can do that. You can also, let's see if I can get this one on the first try. So there are 2 forms of this. This is what is heptagon and heptagram. I don't even know if that's entirely accurate. You could draw some kind of lineal figure that represents 7, and therefore the 7th Sephira Netzach. We have the sphere of Venus, we have the number 7, we have the 7-pointed star, and in this thing we have, right in this Hebrew, it says Netzach, that is pronounced Netzach, not Netzach, and victory. So Netzach literally means victory. So you could, for example, write like Netzach, victory, something like that. Or you could, you could write the Hebrew letters, Netzach, somewhere on here. So the second row on your handout is what I was rambling about earlier in terms of the king, queen, prince, and princess scales of color, which is here, of course, called something different, king, queen, emperor, and empress scales of color. So what these are basically the 4 worlds, the 4 Kabbalistic worlds for everything on the tree of life. Okay, so if you took tetragrammaton, Yod, He, Vav, He, or you took the 4 elements, fire, water, air, earth, and you kind of applied them to every single one of these, there are color attributions for them. Okay, so what that means is this king scale is kind of like the most abstract, the most close to the highest divinity. And we get into the queen scale, prince and princess, or emperor and empress. So there are these scales of color, and I only included the ones 0 through 10. But basically, if you had these colors at your disposal, you could put them on your sigil in some way, on your talisman in some way. Now, which colors would you use?
Red, green. Red or green.
Using the handout that I gave you, what colors might you use?
Amber, emerald, bright yellow, green, all reflective.
Indeed. And so Crowley also wrote that you would write on these colors in flashing colors. In that case, you would write in red on green, because it is the inverse color, okay? You don't need to do that, of course. Like I said, you try to do as much as possible. No need to, oh, I don't have amber to put on here. You might as well just not do it at all, okay? You just work with what you have. Another general magical lesson. So amber, emerald, we're going to assume that this color is emerald. For those who don't know this, the Sephiroth are all in the queen scale, and the paths are not on this one, but the paths are usually depicted in the king scale. So black is the third queen scale color, and so on and so forth. Just for those who don't know why those colors are the way they are. Okay, so I pulled out column, what is that, 96 or something, 94, 99? Column 99. The Archangels of Asiya. So basically you could go through 777 and find all these names. In the seventh key scale on that column, we have Haniel. So we could literally just write Haniel like that. Haniel. So apparently the Archangel of Asiya of Venus is Haniel. I was going to say it's of 7 letters, but it's not of 7 letters. I'll just throw in a god name at this point, which is Venusian, which is Babylon, right? So Babylon, right? So one cool thing is that you can also take names of the same amount of letters and put them in the actual lineal figure as well. Babylon in 7 is a common one, but yeah.
In terms of let's take 7-letter word of Babylon, for instance, is there a point that we would attribute to start it with, like upper left, upper right, bottom, far left?
I think kind of logically I would start at the top and then go clockwise, but there are various magical reasons to do otherwise.
But nothing on this chart.
Nothing on this chart. Actually, I might get to an example later, but we'll see. So the third row, we have the Archangels of Asiya. Ours is Haniel or Haniel. We can kind of write it around the edge. You could also, write it write Babylon or whatever on the inside or in these areas. This is a magical sigil that is a combination of all these ideas as formed by your will. So you do not need to copy this. You can do your own thing. As we move on, we have some magical images of the Sephiroth. It's interesting to read 777 as an explanation of Crowley's beliefs about the Kabbalah and why he might put things in certain rituals, such as the Gnostic Mass. Okay, so number 7, what do we have there? So bottom row, middle, the magical images of the Sephiroth.
Oh, a beautiful naked woman.
A beautiful naked woman. I wonder if that appears in any rituals we know of. So theoretically, if you could go home and take all of the Playboys under your bed, and you could cut out You can also, draw a naked woman, but I won't even pretend to try that. So I kind of included somewhat random columns. There are many that I left out, so do not pretend that things on this handout are exhaustive. So then when I say the next one, I'm really just talking about the next one on this handout, not like the next one in any kind of order that you would put these onto a sigil. The next one is the general attribution of the tarot. So all the small cards of the tarot are attributed to the Sephiroth. So the aces are all attributed to Keter. All the twos are attributed to Hofma, the two, and so on and so forth. So the seven of wands, the 7 of cups, the 7 of swords, and the 7 of discs are all attributed to Venus and Netzach. So you could attach those images to your talisman. You could put them down and put your talisman on top of them. You could stack them all together and put them over or under your talisman. You could take the images on those tarot cards and draw them onto your talisman. You're getting the idea that these things correspond. You want as much related to the object of your intention as possible. So turning, you guys can, of course, keep working on your talismans as you will. I will not interrupt that. Well, I will interrupt that. I'll keep talking. But don't mind me. So if you flip over your piece of paper, there are what I think are the most important selections out of 777 in terms of the huge variety of gods that correspond to the various Sephiroth. So we have Egyptian, Hindu, some Scandinavian gods, some Greek gods, some Roman gods, and the Christian gods. Okay, so starting with the selection of Egyptian gods, I again recommend reading this kind of as, not just as a thing to memorize, but as Crowley's explanation of his magical philosophy that appears in his writings and rituals. For this one, under 7, we have a very simple kind of Hathor for the Egyptian goddess. So we could add this to our various names. In fact, you could plan it out so that you have exactly 7 names around the, what is that called? The circumference of the circle. If you're into that kind of thing, you could even look up the Egyptian iconography or the Egyptian hieroglyphics of Hathor. You could write the name in the original hieroglyphics. She'd probably appreciate that more than our bastardized English version. But again, it's the intention. So if you move on, I personally think that it's quite interesting that Crowley attributed Aum to the 0 in the kind of key scale there. I find that an interesting way of showing his understanding of Aum, as well as his understanding of the Kabbalistic 0, the Kabbalistic knot, and so on and so forth. Again, I encourage you to really read this as more than just something to memorize. For number 7, we have Bhavani and the lovely Crowley, etc. Right? He's like, you guys know, right? It's like, you're writing this book for us? Just put down the names. Yeah.
What are those brackets all the time?
So the brackets actually refer to him. So he published 777 pretty early on in his magical career, and then he went back and he wrote essays about his attributions. That if you look in that 777, it's just in the back. Those essays are there, and he added some attributions. Those added attributions, I believe, are in double brackets. I'm not sure why there are single brackets, to be honest.
So there's brackets, parentheses,
So,
and
Parentheses were in the original, I know that
Yeah.
for sure.
Brackets, I believe, is the stuff that Crowley added in what you were just saying.
Okay.
Double brackets is the stuff that Beta pulled out from other, even later sources.
Awesome.
Also added.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beta meaning
If there's one person you should trust with your editorial things, it's probably Beta. So I also agree with a lot of these attributions for various reasons. Yeah, so Bhavani, etc., that might be a beta node copying Crowley. I would say that pretty much any feminine sensual goddess of sorts would apply there, such as even things, I mean, he has Lakshmi under 10, I would put that in some aspect under 7. But if you have no idea about these deities, I do not recommend putting them on your sigil. You should have some kind of familiarity. Just Wikipedia them at least. Come on guys. It's 2016. You can do some work. So the next one is some Scandinavian gods. I like his kind of flippant use of language there. So we have Freya, after which we have Friday. So you could add that to your kind of your thing, your circle of names, or you could put one name in here. You know, put a little Freya in here. Put another name here. Be creative. So moving on, Greek gods. We have Aphrodite and Nike, as we call her now. So basically, yeah, Roman gods. We have Venus. Basically, we're going through these different cultures and saying that is this archetype, that is this archetype, that is this archetype, and calling upon all these gods and or goddesses that are resonant with this archetype. In the second row, we have a selection of Christian gods. I believe there are some jokes in here for those who are wise enough to read them as such. For example, under number 2 we have, or under number 1 we have God the 3 in 1. Under number 2, we have God the Father, and also, of course, the God that guides Parliament.
Yes.
Like Roger Kiplin as well.
Yeah.
Yes. And so for 7, we have the Messiah or the Lord of Hosts. See the prayer book or Richard Kipling, etc. He was pretty tongue-in-cheek in this one in particular, I think. But he does make the point that there are attributions of at least aspects of the Trinity of Christian gods that are associated with these different separate.
Then I've got a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, in Greek gods, they have Pan for 0, but for Roman and for Christian gods, there's no 0.
Interesting. Yeah. What do you think about that?
What's nothing in Christianity?
What's nothing in Christianity?
Yeah, I think that's the idea, is they don't really have
The time before God.
I would argue that there are certain Christian mystics, for example, off the top of my head, Meister Eckhart has a very strong notion of the nothing. Also, the anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing also uses nothing as a kind of symbol. That being said, the orthodoxy of Christianity has no notion of. I would even argue a god in Keter, although apparently he thinks that is so, but he does not attribute anything to 0 for the Roman or the Christian. I think simply because culturally there was nothing that really corresponded in a way where he's like, yeah, that definitely.
So there's nothing for nothing.
Desert.
Nothing for nothing, yeah. I mean, really, the true symbol of it is nothing, is silence. So maybe they're just better at it. So I included on the bottom there, on the bottom left and the bottom right, there are stones and there are perfumes. Okay? These are things that you might use in your ceremony to consecrate it, or if you're really clever, you could somehow incorporate those into the talisman itself. Incense does, in fact, stick to paper. You could, for example, loft this over some kind of rose incense, and it would retain a scent for a little bit. You might have to reconsecrate it. You could have an emerald engraved with this kind of thing if you have too much time on your hands or whatever. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it in theory. But in general, the idea is that you want as many things, as many ideas, and as many senses to be activated as possible when at least doing the ritualistic consecration of this object. Okay, so you want something visible like a 7-pointed star and all this business. You want something smellable such as perfumes. You perhaps want something audible like say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like that's something that's audible and is 7. It corresponds. It's very simple actually. You could get crazy and do something like 3, 1, 3 or something for the knocks, or do it on a bell. You could also have something for your taste, a rose tasting thing, something like that.
Rose water.
Rose water, absolutely, and all the other senses. The one at the bottom middle is magical formulae. These are interesting. I can argue with their attributions all day long. This one in particular has Ararita as a 7-fold word. That is because Ararita has 7 letters. And also refers in general to, in Crowley's mind, to uniting opposites into the ultimate unity. It's kind of a Venusian idea insofar as genus is love, which is union. But it's quite easy to attribute Ararita to many other things, including the sun, or the one, or many other things. You could, suppose you had Babylon written here, you could also have, like, Ararita written here. You can arrange all the words in different ways to make it nice and esoteric looking. So, suppose we were to create a ritual to consecrate this talisman. You could easily basically do anything that is in accordance with your intention, that is meant to be symbolically corresponding to Venus in some way. So if you really wanted to charge it, you could put it in your bed while you're having sex, for example. Right? Is that not the kind of ultimate Venusian invocation there? You could simply kiss it as an act of consecrating it, and boom, it's your talisman. You could also be much more specific and much more rigmarole about it and rumty-dump about it, and you could do all these different rituals to specifically get that Venusian energy invoked into the talisman, okay? And let's see. So it will be kind of a general ceremony is usually done in this way, okay? You have a banishing of some kind. What is an example of a banishing ritual? Star Ruby or LBRP. Okay? Star Ruby, LBRP, or yelling, Bolasti, and Empeda. So there are 2 words from the Book of the Law, Bolasti and Ompeda, where Crowley says they're basically onomatopoeia of like explosions, like Ompeda, or something like that. And he says that basically they're essentially banishing words. You could also yell Apopantos Kakudaimenos. You could say Procolo Procol este profani, Hekos Hekos este Bebeloi. Things like this. Those are what we call banishing by fiat, which basically means you say, we're banished. Except in a different language, so it sounds cooler. But what we're doing is banishing. What that means is you're establishing kind of a magical space. You're establishing the world, the magical world or temple, and you're clearing out all the stuff that you don't want, or in other words, you're kind of balancing it all out to be normal. If it's all like a sandbox, you kind of just wipe it all clean. So that you can... What comes after banishing?
Invocation.
Indeed. You could have said purification and consecration, you would have also been right. But we're going to skip that. Invocation. So invocation can also be split up into general and particular, or it doesn't have to be. So basically you're wiping things away with banishing, and then you're putting things on there with invocation. In this case, we want something Venus. Okay, so we're going to do some kind of like Venus invocation. What does that mean? You can take the kind of traditional ceremonial greater invoking ritual kind of thing of evoking the planet. You can also just read a poem that is Venusian. You can sing a song that is related to Venus. You can say a mantra that is related to Venus in some way. Basically, you're invoking something. Okay? Next. Anyone have a guess here?
Church the talisman.
Stealing my thunder. I was going to totally expect no one would get that one. So the charge, sometimes called an oath of sorts, it's where you say, this is why I'm here, and this is why you're here, and this is what we're going to do. And then what might you do? It's there. You kind of do the thing at that point, whatever you're going to do. It can be really, really simple. Like, it could be that kiss, that moment of the kiss. It could be the climactic prayer that you're doing. That would be the point at which, if you're doing this ritualistically, you would engage in sex at that point, once you set up the temple in that way. Once that part is done, once you've said, the charge itself could be that, easily. It's the proclamation of a god at that point. You're saying, this is so, and by your word it is made so, in that magical sense. You could easily just proclaim it, and it is so. After that, what might you want to do? You clean up the mess, guys. Okay, so you banish again. Banish. Matters what you're trying to do, but in a lot of traditions, you take the talisman and you put it outside somewhere, outside of the circle. So you clean the area, but you leave the talisman. Charges. Thank you, Dennis. So helpful. Okay, so you want the talisman to remain charged. In some cases, you don't, especially if you're doing something with it in that ritual space, such as consuming it as a Eucharist. It basically doesn't really matter because it's in you, but you still want to clear the space. So a really, really simple version of this. I know you can't even read this, but banish, invoke, tell them why you're here, and then banish again. If you want to go this kind of Western Hermetic ceremonial way, this is the super bare bones version of a ritual that you would do. Get rid of all the other stuff, invoke the stuff you do want, declare what it is your intention, and then clear the space. Balance out the space. Okay. We have 20 minutes to create this ritual and to make it happen. Who here knows how to banish? Raise your hand. Don't be shy. Who here is willing to do a banishing tonight? Who here really wants to do a banishing tonight? All the hands go down.
I'll do it.
Okay, any. It's good to have the same ones, but we'll do any tonight. Justin, what do you know?
I can do an LBRP.
LBRP, and do you want to do the closing one, Dennis?
Sure.
At the end? Okay, so what we're going to do is an LBRP. And Star Ruby, our LBRP. What banishing are you going to do?
Oh, I'll do LBR as well.
Okay. Okay, beginning, end. Okay, invocation. What kind of invocation can we have? Okay, for the sake of... Oh, I'm holding it. Here it is. So I happened to prepare beforehand, obviously, because I cut out green circles and shit. But so we're going to start with the LBRP. We're going to end with the LBRP.